Welcome students to the lecture on topic Political Philosophy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, part 2nd. In this lecture, we will discuss Rousseau's concept of social contract as basis of his theory of the origin and nature of state, the idea of the context in which Rousseau worked and developed his political philosophy, know Rousseau's views regarding the impact man's nature has upon the creation of state and in defining its role, and finally have an idea of the evolution and the development of Rousseau's theory of sovereignty. Dear students, Jean-Jacques Rousseau is one of the great and the last contract theorists besides Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Rousseau's theory of social contract is paramount for understanding his political thought, a complete expression of which could be found in his important work, The Social Contract. Rousseau understood that for making any effective exploration of the political problems of his time, one must concede to the already known methods and ways of analysis. And since in his time the dominant mode of political analysis was the contract theory, therefore he employed the same. In a way, it can be understood that his political philosophy was an attempt to answer the already raised questions by his predecessors. However, unlike his predecessors like Hobbes and Locke, his theory of social contract was a departure in various aspects. Contract theories persisted until the end of the 18th century as the dominant mode of political analysis. Although the concept of social contract goes back to the Sophists and is briefly discussed in both Plato's and Cicero's Republic, it's really a modern idea. The social contract theory rests upon the fundamental argument that a state is actually the creation of a contract between human beings, and it is the terms and conditions of the contract that essentially determines the powers and functions delegated to the organs of the state like government. It also means that the state is created on the basis of mutual consent of its members. Therefore, this theory was a complete contrast to the general and dominant view held during medieval times, which premised upon the argument that state is a divine institution created by God, and the ruler of the state is the representative of God on earth. Hence, neither the state nor the ruler are responsible to the people. However, the consent contract theories rejected this theory on the basis that both state and the ruler are actually the creations of human beings rather than the divine creations. State is a man-made institution and government is based upon the consent of the ruled, thereby making both state and government subservient to the human reason and their convenience, and Rousseau is one of the advocates of such a standpoint. What is unique about Rousseau's political analysis is that he combines elements of Hobbes' and Locke's theories of contract in a way that challenges both. This is true as well in his interpretation of the state of nature, which of course is the starting point for all the contract theorists. In case of Rousseau, however, the state of nature is treated more as an actual historical condition than it is by his predecessors. Although the basic mode of reasoning he employs in thinking about the state of nature and the contract is still essentially that of logical imagination. What Rousseau does unequivocally concede to Hobbes and Locke is that whether the state of nature is conceived historically or imaginatively, people's natural condition is one of the absolute liberty and equality. Born in Geneva and lived in France, the two different political systems of that time and the experiences associated therewith strengthened Rousseau's political speculations and provided the required insights. The two systems provided suggestions and strengthened his liking for a popular government. As Hobbes and Locke, Rousseau started his political theory with the idea of state of nature. According to his discourse on inequality, men in the primitive times or the natural men lived a very happy and carefree life. Those men were like noble savages who lived in state of perfect happiness. Nature had all that sufficed their needs, as their needs were simple and limited. For Rousseau, man in the state of nature was like other animals, confined to his own self. He was asocial, as he never felt any need to socialize with other men, thus making him an independent, self-sufficient and a contented being. The state of nature, according to Rousseau, was the state of perfect equality and liberty. All men were equal with no discrimination on any ground. Simply put, Rousseau believes the state of nature was a state of peace because people are naturally good in the sense that they have a natural empathy for their fellow creatures. This natural goodness is easily confirmed, says Rousseau, because we see it in ourselves as well as in others. No normal person wants to see others suffer, and there are many examples of people risking their lives to prevent others from being hurt. Thus, the two underlying basic principles that determine the behavior of men in the state of nature were self-interest and pity. These were the two primary sentiments present among the people there, rather than reason and logic. Thus, according to Rousseau, the state of nature was a state of peace. Man was carefree and happy until the gradual process of change began, which made it somewhat turbulent. The natural innocence of the man is lost because with the growing population, people get into private property and begin thinking in terms of mine and thine. With this, people lose original innocence and the peaceful state of nature becomes violent. Thus, according to him, with the inventions and discoveries and the subsequent social organizations with underlying inequalities, the peaceful state of nature turned otherwise. Such conditions arose which made it difficult, with the resources at the disposal of each individual, to maintain their primordial freedom and equality. Hence, men out of necessity enter into contract with each other to create a state. The contract made men to abandon the state of nature and enter into a civil state, and the contract, as per Rousseau, would have been as the situation demanded. Rousseau essentially endeavored to find a solution to the problem of how the liberty of the individuals becomes compatible with the regulations of the society created, so that what they lose as individuals while entering into the contract they gain in collectivity, thus trying to define the problem as, where shall we find a form of association which will defend and protect with the whole common force the person and the property of each associate, and by which every person, while uniting himself with all, shall obey only himself and remain as free as before. For Rousseau, the greatest problem was that a state must be organized in such a way that it does not compromise with the liberty of individuals. There has to be such a mechanism where both the liberty and social control are possibly compatible, and Rousseau somehow was able to devise such a system in the form of his concept of general will as the ultimate sovereign in the state. As he says, each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity we receive each member as an individual part of the whole. In other words, each individual must contract with all others to turn over their natural rights to every other individual. In this way, says Rousseau, the locus of sovereignty remains within the whole community of which each individual is a part. It follows, therefore, that while all are subject to the sovereign power of the community, at the same time all share a portion of that power in their capacity as citizens. As Rousseau says, the purpose of the contract is that every person, while uniting himself with all, shall obey only himself and remain as free as before. This, according to Rousseau, essentially becomes possible with the sovereignty put in the entire community. For him, every individual is a part of the legislative process, as it is the right of every individual to have their share of the legislative powers. However, what distinguishes Rousseau while interpreting his concept of popular sovereignty is that for Locke, the sovereignty is put in the hands of the chosen few, who are to act as the representatives of the people, while as for Rousseau, the sovereignty belongs to the entire community. The concept of general will is Rousseau's major contribution to Western political thought, and any comprehension of his political theory requires a thorough grasp of it. For Rousseau, general will is the sovereign power meant for the collective good of the entire community. It is general in the sense that it represents and is a reflection of the will of all the people. And also, what makes it general is not the number of voters, rather the interests uniting them. The general will must not be confused with the totality of the individual wills. Individual wills added together cannot, he insists, constitute the general will, because individual wills take account of private and particular matters, whereas the general will only takes account of common concerns. The general will then would seem to be the will of the people functioning as a body politic, the will of the society viewed as a living and rational political organism. An individual's life is determined by two types of wills, as actual will and real will. Actual will is motivated by his immediate selfish interest. Real will is motivated by his ultimate collective interest. Actual will is reflected in his ordinary self. Real will is reflected in his better self. Actual will prompts him towards gratification of his desires. Real will induces him to acts of reason. Actual will is transient, unstable and inconsistent. It changes from moment to moment. Real will is stable, constant, consistent and determinate. Man's freedom consists in overcoming his actual will and following the direction of the real will, because it is the real will that constitutes general will and becomes the source of common good which is shared by all in the community. And general will harmonizes the will of all. While talking about the will of all and general will, Rousseau says, the latter regards only the common interest, the former regards private interest and is indeed but a sum of private wills. But remove from these same wills the pluses and minuses that cancel each other, and then the general will remains as the sum of the differences. Thus, the concept of general will is the crux of Rousseau's system and probably his most distinct contribution to political thought. For him, general will must both come from all and apply to all. As such, Rousseau concludes, the general will is always right, that is, always right in the moral sense of reflecting the public good. It may happen, of course, that the sovereign community will misjudge the real public interest, but this Rousseau considers a technical problem that can in large measure be resolved by effectively structuring society and state. But it cannot happen that the general will, so long as it remains general, would ever consciously pervert the public good. Thus, for Rousseau, liberty consists in obeying the general will, for it is this that is always morally right. Also, the purpose for which people enter into contract is to secure their liberty, and by disobeying general will, they are but disregarding their moral liberty, for it is the general will which is always in conformity with the moral liberty of all. Those who disobey the general will can be forced to obey it, or in other words, can be forced to be free. Thus, he propounds the concept of positive liberty, wherein an individual is not only free, but he is free for some moral end, that is to enhance ourselves as moral beings. For realizing this political order, Rousseau believes that the state must be relatively small and also the social order must be egalitarian. The condition for a state to be small is important so that people can assemble at a place and be a part of the law making. Also, it enhances the chances of intense sense of community. While as an egalitarian system is important for maintenance of general will, therefore, contract, according to Rousseau, transformed the lives of men from being merely as animals of instinct into human beings. They begin to relate to each other as social and moral beings, which is more than their being together only on the basis of their instincts. As he says, the passing from the state of nature to the civil state produces in man a very remarkable change by substituting justice for instinct in his conduct and giving to his actions a moral character which they lacked before. While concluding, we can say Rousseau is in no sense a primitivist. He does not prefer the noble savage to civilized humanity as many have mistakenly believed. Quite the contrary, in fact. The superiority of civilized people, at least their potential superiority, is clear. They alone have risen above mere animal existence to become moral beings who are capable of making moral choices. In a way, it was transformation as an individual being to a collective being with the freedoms associated. The contract was such that each individual was a part of it in equal terms, and the sovereign is the general will. Thus, for him, the state is composed of equal individuals, none having authority over another, who equally participate in the general will, which is the sole fount of legitimate authority. With these words, dear students, I conclude the lecture on Political Philosophy of Rousseau, Part 2nd. Hope you find the lecture useful. Goodbye and God bless you.